Well, it's more bad news for Canadian real estate, as a new study is suggesting that some markets need to fall by as much as 40% for housing prices to become more affordable. And on top of that, some households are facing up to $24,000 more per year in just interest costs. Meanwhile, Toronto real estate prices are down $245,000, with the fastest declines happening in the city, not the suburbs. And Vancouver's real estate market is down $130,000, with the rate of decline now 2 times faster than that of Toronto's. But in the face of all this clearly bad news, 2 of Canada's biggest real estate companies have come out with some pretty rosy forecasts for 2023. And in today's video, I'm going to discuss the idea that housing prices need to decline, the forecast for 2023 and what the outlook for the Canadian real estate market looks like, and how to benefit from the declines in prices. But before we get into the details, my name is Nolan Mathias, and if you want to thrive financially, this is the place for you. So go ahead, click that subscribe button, and make sure you hit the like button so more people like you can see this video. Okay, so let's jump in and take a look here and see what's going on with the news and the Canadian real estate market, because obviously there's some pretty interesting information out there today. Let's start first and foremost with this article that suggests that some markets have to fall by 40%. Now, this is an article based on some research put out by an organization called Alberta Central. Now, the irony here is I live in Alberta. I actually had to Google what Alberta Central was because I'd never heard of this before, but obviously they're being cited after doing some research in the Financial Post. So clearly they're a big deal. Needed to check them out, find out what they actually were, because obviously they aren't a huge deal because nobody really knows what they are. It turns out that Alberta Central is a company that supports Central Alberta credit unions. Now, they have a whole bunch of things they do. They provide statements, so on and so forth, and apparently they also are providing some research. So when we dig into this and we look at the study that they recently put out here, you can see that they are suggesting that some markets have to come down up to 40%. Now, what's interesting here is this is even after some markets like Toronto's are down $245,000. We'll get to that in a minute. But they're suggesting that some markets need to fall pretty significantly. And they also do some interesting calculations with respect to how much more money is going towards interest payments. So for example, homeowners in Vancouver and Toronto are paying up to $37,000 more in interest payments per year. And then they go on to break this out. So places like Edmonton are paying up to $12,000 more per year, Calgary $16,000 more per year, Montreal $16,500 more per year, and Winnipeg $10,000 more per year. And then they go on to suggest that about $12,000 more per year is needed to purchase a benchmark house in Canada. So this is a house of around $700,000. So basically what they did here is they went ahead and they did a whole bunch of math, and then they did some research that would seemingly be inspired by the RBC Affordability Index. Now, as we get near the end of the article here, they suggest that home prices would need to fall another 35 to 40% in Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, and Montreal to restore affordability to where it stood over the past decade. So in other words, what they're doing here is they're comparing the prices right now to what they would need to be in order to put affordability back on par with what it's been like for an average over the last 10 years. And it's no secret that with the pandemic and with the increase in housing prices, as well as increased interest rates, that affordability has shrank. And obviously this is something that has been well documented by places like RBC and their affordability index, which, by the way, is probably the single best source of information on affordability in Canada, period. Now, my question would be, is Alberta Central's data based on how much the Vancouver and the Toronto and the Ottawa markets have already fallen? Because if you take a look at the prices in Toronto, for example, Toronto real estate prices are now down $245,000 according to Better Dwelling. And this is more importantly based off the Toronto Real Estate Board's data that was released at the beginning of December. And what's interesting here is that city prices are falling nearly 2 times faster than the burbs. So up until now, primarily the price drops have been in the suburbs. This is where everybody flocked to during the pandemic, and up until recently, we were seeing price stability in the downtown core. Now it seems the prices in the downtown core are starting to feel some pressure. And then on top of that, if you take a look at what's going on in the Vancouver market, Vancouver real estate prices are down less than Toronto's, down 130,000 from the peak, but they're now falling at a rate that is 2 times faster than that of Toronto's. So that is clearly showing that there is a downward trend in Canada's biggest real estate markets. Now, this may not be true for the smaller markets, but the big markets are definitely feeling some pain. And as noted by RBC Economics, the housing market correction in Canada is widespread. It is very clear at this moment that at the end of November, the housing price declines did not stop and that they are continuing in pretty much all markets across Canada. And there's no surprise here as variable rate mortgages start to hit trigger rates and declines in activity hit all-time highs. More on both of those in a minute. But what I find really interesting here is the rosy picture that is being painted by two of Canada's biggest real estate companies, and frankly, two companies that are relied upon quite extensively for their research. And this is Royal Lepage and Remax. And both of these companies have come out with very, very, very rosy forecasts for the future of the Canadian real estate market in 2023. With Royal Lepage forecasting a modest 1% drop in real estate prices for next year, and Remax suggesting a very modest 3.3% decrease in home prices next year. Now, clearly there's some flaws in both of these forecasts. Let's start first and foremost with the fact that interest rates are up almost 3%, which is a 30% headwind with respect to buying power in the Canadian real estate market. Then let's take a look at home sales, and home sale activity is down quite substantially. And then let's add onto the top of that half of variable rate mortgages with fixed payments have now hit their trigger rates. And all of these things should lead any economist to realize that a 1 to 3% drop in real estate prices, or in other words, a pretty much flat real estate market over the next 12 months, is highly unlikely. And while a significant drop to home prices like a 20 to 30% drop is probably not something that's in the cards either, I have to think that at least a minimum of 5% reduction in housing prices in 2023 should be just a basic starting point for most economists in this space. So let's take a little bit deeper look into why this seems like it should be so obvious. And let's start by looking at the simple fact that housing market activity is down pretty much across the country, both from the perspective of new listings as well as from the perspective of home sales. So you can see that in Vancouver, we have home sales that are down 52%. In the Fraser Valley, they're down 57%. This is in the interior of BC near Vancouver. We see in Toronto, they're down 49%. In places like Calgary, they're down 20%, and so on and so forth. So pretty much across the country, sales activity is down. And with low sales activity, it means it's going to be harder for housing prices to remain supported. Now, there are certain aspects of the economy that will support housing prices, but again, that 1 to 3% reduction in housing prices seems like it's just a little bit too rosy for my liking. The only place I'm really concerned about housing prices, by the way, going up and not down is in Calgary, where you can see that home sales and new listings are pretty much on par with each other, which means there's growing lack of inventory in that market, which means that there could be a bump up in prices depending on what happens in the new year. Now, you do have to keep in mind that this is November. This is a time where people as a general rule tend to take their houses off the market as things lead into the holidays and as the desire to move in cold weather starts to go down. But for the most part, you can see across the country outside of Calgary, we've got a lot less sales and a lot less new inventory data. By the way, what's really telling about this chart is that they don't even have to have a positive side to the graph. Everything is negative. There's no positive data for sales or new listings in any market in Canada at the moment. Now, on top of that, we find ourselves in a position as well where half of all variable rate mortgages in Canada with fixed payments have now hit their trigger rate. Now, there's some things that banks are doing to make this easier on consumers, but at some point, the reality is going to hit that people are losing money on their properties, paying a significant amount of interest, as that report from Alberta Central suggested. And this is going to lead some people in 2023 to either sell their property out of fear that they aren't going to be able to continue to make their payments, or find themselves in a worse situation where they end up in defaults. Now, defaults in Canada are still at all-time lows. However, that number, given what's happening in the economy with higher interest rates, higher inflation, and what seems to be upcoming job losses, is going to increase at some point, which means there's going to be further downward pressure on real estate prices. Then, of course, all of that combined with our 1%, 10% rule, where a 1% increase in interest rates represents a 10% reduction in buying power, well, we now know that Canadians have a 20 to a 30% reduction in buying power, which is going to have an effect on the market. Even as sellers continue to hold on to their properties, and even though sellers don't like to sell when buyers aren't buying, there are going to be those who find themselves in a situation where they have to sell either because of job loss, because of a transfer across the country, or for any other number of reasons. And as the realities of having to sell a property are being faced by many Canadians, that is again going to provide that downward pressure on the Canadian real estate market. And I cannot see, even with further immigration and other things that are supporting the Canadian real estate market, including declining home starts, where the numbers will end up in a scenario where we're down by less than 5%. Now, this isn't a prediction. I'm more trying to provide perspective here so that you don't go out and read Royal Lepage or Remax's report and go, wow, seems like things are going to be okay. I can go ahead and buy or sell knowing that housing prices are going to remain flat. Now, all of that being said, there are going to be some opportunities for certain types of home buyers in the 2023 real estate market. First and foremost, first-time homebuyers have a huge opportunity in 2023. They're going to be able to buy with less pressure than they had in 2020 and 2021. There's going to be more options available on the market as there will be less buying activity, and therefore houses will tend to sit on the market longer, giving buyers the opportunity to look and find the property that is just right for them, without having to worry about it selling out from underneath them in the next 24 hours. And on top of that, housing prices, no matter what way you cut it, are going to be lower in most Canadian markets. If you're in Vancouver, Toronto, or Ottawa, you can expect they're going to be substantially lower. If you're in other cities across the country, you can expect that they aren't going to necessarily be significantly lower, but that you are going to be able to get a lower price and quite possibly get a deal. The days of paying over list for a property in Canada are somewhat numbered. And in addition to the opportunities for first-time home buyers, there's going to be opportunities as well for what we call move-up buyers. These are people who are selling properties and buying higher valued properties, maybe with higher square footage or nicer areas. Because while the tendency is to want to buy when everyone else is buying, the true opportunity for a move-up buyer is to buy when housing prices are declining. Because even though you'll be losing a little bit of equity in your lower valued property, the potential for price gains on the higher priced property that you'll be buying are significantly greater, which means you always want to move up if you're going to move up when housing prices are declining. By the way, the only real time that you want to buy in a market when housing prices are going through the roof is if you are a move down buyer, because you're locking in the equity on your higher value properties and moving into a lower value property, which has less opportunity for price declines. Now, if you are somebody who's in the market for a property in 2023, I highly suggest you check out my Homebuyer Masterclass, where we teach you everything that you need to know about buying a home in Canada. And specifically, we make sure that there's no landmines or surprises that you will find in that process. Because if there's one thing we've learned from the pandemic, it is that the single best thing that somebody could have done in 2021 or 2022 in order to make sure that they didn't pay too much for a property is to be educated in the real estate process. And not just by your realtor or your friends and family, but by somebody who has no skin in the game and can give you the information you need to know in order to make sure you are well informed. So you can go and check out that course at homebuyermasterclass.ca. It, by the way, has an offer with Mortgage 360 if you end up getting your mortgage with us that gives you 10 times your money back just for signing up for that course. Oh, and if you want to know more about what's happening with respect to interest rates and the Bank of Canada and all of that stuff, make sure you check out this video here.